I am not the leader of the Cucurbit working group. Richard Hassel is, but I'm going to semi-present in his stead today, and I guess I missed the memo. So my presentation is not quite as in-depth as others, but I'm going to share just kind of what the most of the members that we had on our conference call have done to date. And so forgive me if I missed anyone in this group, but these are our working group members. Jonathan Schultheis and Penny Perkins, BZ at NCSU, and Richard Hassel, Tony Kyneth, and Brian Ward at Clemson, Pat Wechter, Shaker Kalsick, Amnon Levi at USDA Vegetable Lab in Charleston, Jen Zhao, myself at UF, Aaron Roscoff and Nancy Burrell at USDA Horticulture Lab in Fort Pierce, and Carol Miles at Washington State. So really, in objective 1 and 2 is where most of the work that I'm going to talk to you about is coming from, and some of this it will be some overlap. And when we get to the overlap, I'll just simply skip forward. But really, a continuum of work on disease and pest resistance in cucurbits. A lot of this was essentially carry forward from the last iteration of this grant, and thankfully now we're nearly to, I guess, commercialization of some of this work that's been years in the making. Another major effort would be yield and quality of grafted cucurbits, and most of our work has been focused on watermelon. Jen and others have done some work, like Penny was mentioning, on some specialty melons, cantaloupe, Gallia, other specialty type melons, but the bulk of the work has been done on watermelon. And the last small piece will be on water and nutrient management, and potentially water and nutrient savings when using grafted cucurbits. So disease and pest resistance, fusarium wilt really has been the driver of this work. Really, in my opinion, the driver of utilization of grafted watermelon in the Southeast, at least. We don't have reliable resistance in seedless watermelon, which is the bulk of our market now, and so growers are left with few options for feasible management of fusarium wilt. And in my opinion, utilization of grafted watermelon is their best option to adequately manage that disease. Whether that pans out economically remains to be seen, but certainly from a disease management standpoint, that is the best option we have. And we've got members of the group, Richard Hassel, Tony Kyneth, have demonstrated multiple times in the past that we can successfully manage fusarium wilt with several rootstocks, several different types of rootstocks, interspecific, lagenaria, citroides type watermelons. All of that has been demonstrated. I would say a large percentage of our rootstock, commercial rootstock material that is used currently is mostly based on interspecific crosses between Cucurbita maxima and Cucurbita machata. And what we found 5-6 years ago is that those interspecific crosses are generally very susceptible to root knot nematode. And I don't know that anyone has screened the various species. Obviously, Meloidegon incognita is the bulk of the population if you surveyed the Southeast, and they are certainly susceptible to incognita. So that's a major issue, because often these two diseases, fusarium wilt and this pest, root knot nematode, occur simultaneously in deep, well-drained sands that predominate the Southeast. So that's a major issue. We found in some of our work that we can actually reduce watermelon yield because of nematode infestation. So that's one of the major issues for deployment. Currently, commercial deployment is it really needs to be deployed in conjunction with some type of nematode management technique if the grower knows or at least think they have a nematode infestation. So that's a problem. It just creates more input costs in a system that would already be fairly expensive from an input cost standpoint by using grafted watermelons. So this is our rootstock that we use almost exclusively. This is carnivore from Syngenta. Good fusarium resistance, but nematodes love it. This is an interspecific hybrid. So that's why we have been looking at various rootstocks for the last several years to try to eliminate this and maintain fusarium wilt management. This is just a carnivore will be top left. And so this is some of the material from USDA. I don't know specifically which one it is. These are likely Bulldog and 246, or I'll get to the name here in a second, 246 or 252 from USDA, and some screening work that we've done here. So quite obviously very, very, very strong resistance to root knot nematode in some of this newer material that is fusarium wilt resistant. This is just one of the few data slides that I've got, and you can see this is a bit older. We have this variety that has the lowest root gall index, named as Bulldog, but this has been since changed to Carolina Strongback, and carnivore again is our susceptible control. This is on the 0 to 10 scale, so significant galling in carnivore compared to the USVL labs were developed at Pat Wechter and Richard Hassel in Charleston, and so very, very positive resistance moving forward. So this Carolina Strongback, also previously known as Bulldog, has been developed in collaboration, I guess really we've done a lot of the screening here, but USDA and Clemson obviously carried the lion's share of that. And it has resistance to fusarium wilt and at least 2 species of root knot nematode, incognita and arenaria, as well as reniform nematode, Rhodolenculus reniformis. We've seen that, demonstrated that here. And so that's moving on to commercial stage. So that's one of the, I think, major hurdles that we have overcome, is to now we've got material that has fusarium wilt resistance as well as nematode resistance. So we don't have to worry about it increasing input costs further when we deploy grafted watermelons to manage fusarium wilt. So that's almost a checklist type item that we've been working on for a couple years. But some of the work that's going to continue forward, and again, David mentioned this earlier. So a lot of this is pure overlap between the genetics group and the Cucurbit group. Shaker's group in Charleston is looking at PCAP resistance in Maxima and Machado rootstock material. Also, the 482351, which is a powdery mildew resistant lagenaria. Interestingly enough, it also has some resistance to nematodes. It's not the level of resistance that the Citroides lines have. So that's a potential added benefit of the 351 lagenaria rootstock, is the transference of resistance, powdery mildew resistance to the scion, as well as being nematode resistant, nematode and fusarium wilt resistant. So something like that. I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal, is to have a rootstock that has a very, very robust package and adds more than one resistance trait to the final combination. Carol Miles' group, again, like David mentioned, is looking screening for verticillium wilt resistance in the Pacific Northwest, and looking to deploy those rootstocks and grafted to manage that disease. Tony Kina's group at Clemson is looking at resistance to Pythium in fusarium wilt resistant rootstocks. So taking some of the other rootstocks that have been screened and been defined as fusarium wilt resistant or nematode resistant and fusarium wilt resistant to make sure that we don't have, because we've seen in other geographies where a secondary or even tertiary disease that was a non-issue has kind of gained status when grafted plants have been deployed. So Tony's group is screening or surveying Pythium species in watermelon production in South Carolina, and also evaluating some of the rootstocks that have the potential to be deployed for fusarium and nematode resistance, for their resistance to Pythium as well. So from a yield and quality standpoint, Penny just mentioned a few minutes ago about there's been consistency that we've seen over multiple years, and not necessarily trials that have evaluated hollow heart and watermelon, but the data has been pretty consistent that hollow heart tends to be reduced in grafted watermelon compared to non-grafted. So Penny's group is looking at cellular development to determine the whys and the hows of reduced hollow heart in grafted watermelon, and with some specificity of rootstocks. And Jin's group and Richard's group at Clemson are continuing to look at shelf life of grafted watermelon. There seems to be some anecdotal evidence that shelf life is improved, and kind of long-term quality is improved in grafted watermelons compared to non-grafted. Jin's group is also looking, and Richard's group is also looking at flavor and volatiles in grafted watermelons, just really to make sure, and grafted melon, to make sure we're not having any negative side effects that are being brought into consumer traits by grafting. Jin's group, as well as Pat Wechter's group at USDA, are continuing to screen rootstocks, cucurbit rootstocks, for cold tolerance. Seedless watermelons are notoriously slow to grow in the spring, and the bulk of our production tends to be spring into summer. And so both of those groups are screening rootstocks to enhance cold tolerance, enhance early growth and development of seedless watermelons in those early spring seasons. So that's work that's has been started and is going to continue to move forward. From a water nutrient management standpoint, Jin's group has been looking at this in tomato, and now they have had a year of experimentation looking at water and nutrient management from a conventional and organic standpoint in grafted watermelon, and looking at the potential benefits of nutrient and water savings when deploying grafted watermelon. And that work is ongoing. So those are some of the positive things, and some of the concerns that were raised on our phone call is that fairly consistently we see increased fruit size in grafted watermelon. And from a practicality standpoint, generally increase in fruit size sounds like a positive thing, but watermelons is probably one of the few crops where most of our modern cultivars kind of sit on the precipice now of being too large anyway. Market trends are for smaller fruit, and so a lot of our newer highly productive seedless watermelon cultivars already kind of tend to be large anyway, and there's concern that if we graft these, it's going to really put them out of the size class that they're looking for, and that's not a beneficial thing. It may increase yield, but those larger size classes tend to be less marketable than smaller size classes. That's a concern moving forward, and not necessarily the goal of any of these trials as far as investigation standpoint. But on several occurrences, we've seen increased hard seed in grafted watermelon in 2016 and 2017, when we had a paired scion, grafted and non-grafted. On several instances, we've seen increased hard seed. And I don't know that anybody in the group has specific research that's looking at that, but that's one thing that is concerning, because in the instances where it's showed up, it's been significant enough to cause rejection. It would have put those fruit out of tolerance for USDA standards for seedless watermelon. So that's one of the issues that probably need to look into in the next year or so of the project. And like David mentioned earlier, inconsistency of increased yields in non-disease situations in the Southeast. A lot of this group is focused in the Southeast, and we have been looking at grafted watermelon in commercial production, or looking at its fit in commercial production in the Southeast. And we have seen inconsistency, or frankly, a consistency of a lack of yield improvement in a non-disease situation. So our production in the Southeast is quite different than it is in the West Coast and a lot of other areas of the globe. And we don't have long season production in watermelons. We average across all of our market probably 4 harvests on average, and so we don't have this really extended season. And so I think that's the primary reason we don't see these consistent yield increases. So that's something that's a concern for commercial deployment in a non-fusarium situation. So that's a short synopsis of our group, what's been accomplished and kind of what's going to move forward the next year or two. And I'll open it up for any questions.
All right, Josh, that's great. Thank you very much. Any Cucurbit specific questions for Josh?
Yeah, I got one. This is Dean with Syngenta. Hey, Josh, I was wondering on that hard seed coat, was that on just interspecifics or also on the Carolina Strongback, or can you elaborate a little bit?
It would have, at least in three out of the 5 instances, Dean, it's been on interspecifics. Okay. Most of those instances popped up in the last several years where we've had a grafted entry in our watermelon variety trials, paired with its non-grafted counterpart, and that's where it's popped up, where we evaluate those fruit for internal quality. And at the end of the day, you start looking and it's like, well, you got one standout. A lot of times, you get a random seeded melon that makes its way into it. But when you start crunching the data, it showed up that it was one of our grafted entries.
You see that with Carolina Strongback, or any comment on that one yet?
Richard might be, I don't know if Richard's still on the call, but Richard might be more adept at answering that. We have not had Carolina Strongback in enough trials where we've looked at internal quality. At least my group, has been focusing on pest resistance. I know Gilbert and Richard have been looking at quality, fruit quality and yield more than we have. I don't remember hearing Gilbert ever mention it, and I'm not so sure I've ever heard Richard mention that either. So to be honest, I don't know.
Okay, I'll harass Richard later.
Sure.
I can answer that. We haven't seen any incidents of that with Carolina Strongback. No.
Oh, okay, interesting. But you've seen it with carnivore, or when you haven't seen it with Strongback?
I've seen it with carnivore. Yes.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.